I chose silence. But the next morning, the man who pushed me out of Thanksgiving walked into my office, saw me, saw the truth he never knew, and started screaming. Because in that moment, the control he thought he had completely collapsed. And from there on, this was no longer a story about vibes at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know I'm not saying this into a void. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone's there makes all the difference. And if you've ever been the one who gets blamed for changing the vibe just for being yourself, hit subscribe. Not for gossip, for the truth. My name is Jasper Quillen, and this is the story of how my own family tried to uninvite me and accidentally walked straight into my world. Some pain doesn't need shouting. It arrives quietly wrapped in a calm sentence from someone you trust. You won't be coming home for Thanksgiving this year. Your sister's new husband thinks you'd ruin the vibe. No argument, no fight. Just being moved aside so some pain doesn't need shouting. It arrives quietly wrapped in a calm sentence from someone you trust. You won't be coming home for Thanksgiving this year. Your sister's new husband thinks you'd ruin the vibe. No argument, no fight. Just being moved aside so everyone else can feel more comfortable. And that kind of pain settles in slowly. This story isn't here so we can enjoy watching someone get what they deserve, and it's not about judging who's right or wrong. We just step into it with a little stillness to see how much hurt inside families comes not from cruelty but from fear. Fear of comparison. Fear of falling short. Fear of feeling smaller in the very place that's supposed to feel safe. What cuts deepest isn't losing a holiday meal. It's realizing that to keep things easy, people often choose the simplest solution, removing one person. And then we face a familiar choice: speak up and risk being called difficult, or stay silent so no one feels uncomfortable. I chose silence. But the next morning, the man who pushed me out of Thanksgiving walked into my office, saw me, saw the truth he never knew, and started screaming. Because in that moment, the control he thought he had completely collapsed. And from there on, this was no longer a story about vibes at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know I'm not saying this into a void. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes knowing someone's there makes all the difference. And if you've ever been the one who gets blamed for changing the vibe just for being yourself, hit subscribe. Not for gossip, for the truth. My name is Jasper Quillen, and this is the story of how my own family tried to uninvite me and accidentally walked straight into my world. My mom said, "You won't be at Thanksgiving this year. Your sister's new husband thinks you'd ruin the vibe." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't even breathe right for a second. I just sat there in my Chicago office staring at a spreadsheet like it could explain how a grown man gets erased from his own family with one sentence. They said it was to keep things comfortable for the kids. Translation: my success makes him feel small, and everyone decided my seat at the table was the easiest thing to take away. I swallowed it. I let the silence do what my voice always did, make people uneasy. And then the next morning, he walked into my office for a meeting he didn't know I was running, glanced at the nameplate on the head of the table, and started screaming. Because the corporate job my family joked about wasn't a job. It was me. And his entire career was about to live or die under my signature. It was nearly 8 p.m. when the ping of an incoming call cut through the quiet hum of my office. The place had emptied hours ago. Just me, a handful of cold desk lamps glowing over a half-lit loop skyline, and the quarterly performance dashboard of our Denver hub, which I had been dissecting for the past hour. The overhead fluorescence buzzed softly as I rubbed my temple with the side of my thumb, scanning one last ops anomaly before calling it. Then the name Mom lit up my phone. Her voice was calm, but that strained sort of calm, the kind she used when she'd already made up her mind and hoped I'd go along without making it worse. "Jasper," she said, "I wanted to talk to you before your week gets too crazy. About Thanksgiving." I leaned back in my chair, unsure why I felt a knot already forming in my stomach. She continued quickly, like ripping a Band-Aid. "You won't be coming this year. We thought it might be better this way. Gage. He's still adjusting. You know how these things go. He just wants the holiday to feel easy for the kids." I didn't respond. Marissa really wants this to go smoothly, she added. The kids are excited. Lila made a banner. We don't want any tension. Still, I said nothing. I heard her shift on the line, likely in her kitchen in Rockford, probably pacing around like she always did when delivering bad news. It's not personal, honey. It's just he thinks you'll ruin the vibe. There it was. I stared at the screen, the dashboard figures now blurred into a meaningless grid of numbers. I wasn't angry. Not in the traditional sense. I was hollow. Hollow in the way that doesn't scream or punch walls, but just erases. I'm sure we'll figure out Christmas, she added, trying to land the blow softer. This is just one holiday. I still didn't answer. Just let the silence linger long enough for her to feel it. She tried again, Jasper. I ended the call. I sat in that quiet for a long minute, then leaned forward, elbows on the desk, staring at the screen that had once held my full attention. The line that stuck wasn't, "You won't be coming," it was, "Ruin the vibe." Like my presence alone disrupted the warm current they were trying to keep flowing. This wasn't new. Every time I excelled, they didn't celebrate. They recalibrated. They excused themselves from engaging with it, saying it made things tense or awkward or too much. Every recognition, every promotion, every success became another reason I was harder to be around. I didn't gloat. I didn't boast. I barely spoke about work at all. But they still treated my presence like a volume dial cranked too high. I'd learned long ago to keep things separate. Jasper at home. Jasper at work. My family didn't know what I actually did. As far as they were concerned, I worked in corporate in Chicago, whatever that meant. They never asked specifics, and I never offered. I stood, finally closing the laptop. The window glass reflected the half-exhausted version of myself that usually clocked out hours earlier. I grabbed my coat, shutting off the lights one by one, leaving the office in chilled stillness. As I stepped into the elevator and the city lights blinked below me, I didn't yet know that the vibe they claimed I would ruin had just been set in motion to crash straight into the world I ran. And that crash would come at 9:00 a.m. sharp tomorrow morning. I couldn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Because my brain wouldn't stop sorting. Back in my apartment, lights low, a single lamp casting amber over my coffee table, I flipped open my laptop again. My instinct went emotional work. Clean data. Cold truths. No negotiation. No subjective discomfort. Tomorrow's meeting file was already waiting in my inbox. The acquisition of Pinnacle Med Supply had been in motion for weeks, and tomorrow we'd have our first full sit-down with their regional and executive team. The documents were standard org chart distribution routes performance data. I skimmed it, looking for weak spots. Then I saw the name. Gage Hollister. Sales lead. Great Lakes region. I froze. The same name. Same last name as the man who now shared a mortgage with my sister and believed I was a threat to the ambience of turkey and stuffing. I clicked into his record. It was him. I hadn't known where Gage worked. No one told me. Marissa had mentioned he did something in medical sales, but that was the extent of it. I had no idea his company was Pinnacle or that he held a title senior enough to land a seat at tomorrow's table. I leaned back, lips slightly parted, and for the first time since the call, I smiled. It wasn't malice. It wasn't revenge. It was poetry. He didn't want me at the table. Tomorrow he'd walk into my conference room, sit across from me, and realize I was the one signing off on whether his division got restructured, absorbed, or scrapped. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove anything. All I had to do was show up, be myself, and let the facts settle the score. I reopened the performance logs and began to scroll. Q3 sales, regional KPIs, lead conversion rates. Gage's numbers were fine, solid, predictable, but not standout, not irreplaceable. The kind of employee who doesn't cause problems but also doesn't solve them. The kind you forget to promote and can't quite justify firing. Median. I understood then what he feared most. Not me exactly. The contrast. The mirror I'd become the moment we shared space. At 6:40 a.m., I called Mina, my executive assistant. She picked up immediately, she always did. I want full name placards for everyone, titles clearly printed, use the heavier cardstock. She hesitated. Even yours, especially mine. I instructed her to seat Redwood RX along one side, Pinnacle on the other. I would take the head chair, not out of ego, out of clarity, out of message. And double-check their guest list, I added. I want to know exactly who's coming, title and function. By 7:30 I was suited up in charcoal gray tie, knotted with precision. As I looked in the mirror, I told myself out loud what I needed to remember. Do it clean. This isn't about humiliation. This isn't personal. But it's also not silence. You are allowed to exist at full volume. I headed into the morning knowing one thing for certain: Gage Hollister thought he'd left me out of Thanksgiving to preserve the atmosphere. But the only atmosphere he was about to breathe was the one I controlled. And in my world, we don't dim the lights for anyone's comfort. The security feed ticked like a silent metronome as I stood just beyond the glass panel overlooking reception. I didn't need to hear the sound to know the rhythm. I've watched enough acquisition entries to recognize the signals, posture, eye contact, how tightly they clutch their folders. Evelyn Strauss walked like someone who'd had to claw her way to the top chin level, assessing, not intimidated by newer walls. Behind her, Derek Phelps and Tanya Ruiz flanked her like seasoned lieutenants. And then came Gage. He walked in a half-step behind them, tugging at his tie twice in 10 seconds. His expression hovered somewhere between forced composure and breathless dread. I watched him laugh softly at something Tanya said, too high-pitched, too quick, and adjust the folder in his hand like it might anchor him to the ground. He hadn't seen me yet. I waited until Mina gave me the signal from the inner hallway. The room was set. Placards aligned, waters poured, blinds angled just enough to let the skyline loom behind my chair. Then I walked in. Our team entered like clockwork. Richard, Sophia, J. Mina. Then me. The placard read, Jasper Quillen, Chief Operating Officer. It was facing them when they looked up. I sat. I didn't look to my left or right. I looked straight at Evelyn. And then his voice cracked through the silence. You've got to be kidding me. It wasn't loud at first. Just loud enough to shatter the illusion of neutrality. He stood so fast his chair screeched back. You're the COO. His eyes darted from my face to the placard back again. You're Jasper. His voice climbed an octave. This is some kind of setup. Evelyn, what the hell is this? Dead silence. Evelyn, in one swift motion, closed her folder and placed it flat on the table. She didn't look at him. She looked at me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. Sit down, I said. He blinked, shoulders still pitched forward like he wanted to fight gravity itself. I didn't blink. Sit down, I repeated. This is a professional acquisition meeting. You're here as sales lead of Pinnacle Med Supply. That's what we'll treat you as. Nothing more, nothing less. He hesitated, then sat. The air snapped back into place like a snapped rubber band. Someone exhaled. Sophia, maybe. Evelyn tapped her pen once, then resumed with effortless calm. As I was saying, Redwood RX has identified 4 strategic overlaps between our distribution timelines and Pinnacle's projected capacity. I'd like to walk through integration scenarios, if that's all right. I nodded. Proceed. From there, the meeting moved like clockwork. I made no mention of the outburst, no acknowledgement of personal history. I drilled down on KPIs, transition timelines, post-merger evaluations. When I said the phrase, "we'll align compensation and titles based on actual verifiable contribution metrics, not tenure," I didn't look at Gage. But I could see him watching me. His hands were clasped in his lap, white-knuckled. His knee bounced under the table. When the meeting broke for Q&A, he didn't move. He didn't speak. But his head tilted like he was waiting for me to leave. He wasn't going to scream again. Screamers don't scream twice in one day. They beg. And I knew as surely as I knew the money at hand would strike the top of the hour that the next time I saw Gage Hollister it would be in a hallway or behind a closed door. And he would be trying to regain the only thing he had left to lose his illusion of control. Evelyn Strauss lingered after the others had filtered out, her handshake firm, her gaze steady. That was unexpected, she said evenly, once the last of her team had disappeared behind the elevator's closing doors. I offered a measured nod. He's new to corporate-level transitions. Her lips twitched. More than that. May I ask, do you two have history I didn't dodge? He's recently married to my younger sister. There was a pause, but not of surprise. More like a calculation clicking into place. She leaned in slightly. And should I be concerned about a potential conflict of interest? There it was. Not gossip, not curiosity. Corporate risk assessment. I didn't hesitate. None. My decisions will be based on Pinnacle's operational output and individual performance metrics. His personal relationship to me won't influence evaluations. Good, she said crisply. Then we'll consider that box checked. But Jasper, if at any point I sense impropriety, I won't hesitate to pull the deal back for review. Understood. It was fair, necessary even. But now I was bound tightly visibly to a standard higher than just professionalism. I had to be pristine. I had to win clean. When I turned the corner toward my office, Gage was waiting. He didn't knock. He was already halfway through the door before I said anything. I need 10 minutes, he said, voice hollow. Please. I gestured to the seat across from my desk. You have 9. He sat like a man deflating. I didn't know it was you, he began. Marissa never said. Your family always talked like you just worked in logistics. I said nothing. I didn't mean for it to get like this. He continued, eyes darting between the floor and my face. Thanksgiving, I just thought with the kids and everything you'd make things tense. You convinced my mother to call me and disinvite me, I said plainly. He flinched. I didn't convince, I just suggested that maybe it was better. For the vibe. That word again. Gage, I said, voice low. At this company, family connections don't earn immunity. And in my house, you don't get to remove me so you can breathe easier. He swallowed. Look, I get it. I messed up. But if you're going to, he hesitated. I'm just saying I can fix it. We can move past it. Just tell me what you want from me. There it was. The offer, not an apology, not ownership, a trade. What I want, I said, is respect, not because you fear my title, but because you don't get to manipulate people, then ask for silence. He didn't speak. And no, I added, I'm not making this about revenge, but I won't pretend this is nothing either. You owe apologies. Real ones, not negotiations. He nodded numbly, but I could see the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. As he left, Jay was already waiting outside. Got something, she said. Due diligence flagged a minor issue. 2 weeks ago, Gage allegedly pressured his team to revise end-of-quarter numbers before a supervisor review. Not outright fraud, but coercive language in internal emails. I blinked once. Pattern, I asked. Possibly. It's not the first internal memo raising concern. That was the real risk. This wasn't about pride anymore. Not just about family. This was a person who bent narratives until they served him, and that's toxic in business or blood. By late afternoon, my phone rang. Marissa, he told me, she said, breathless. That you're COO. I am. She paused. I didn't know. But you knew about the call, I replied. You let them uninvite me. Silence. He said you being there would make it harder. For him. That you'd overshadow everything. And you agreed. Her voice was smaller now. It felt easier. I swallowed the heat in my chest. This isn't about a holiday, Marissa, I said. This is about you choosing comfort over character. If he's willing to manipulate my presence, what else is he willing to bend? I'm sorry, she whispered. Then start acting like it. The line went quiet. That night, a text lit up my phone from Diane. Let it go. Don't escalate. It's just family stuff. I stared at the screen for a long moment. No, I thought. It's not just family stuff. It's power. And silence. And who gets to tell the story. And I was done letting anyone else narrate mine. By Monday morning, the air in my office felt heavier than usual. Not from the weather, not from the downtown traffic rattling against the windows, but from the quiet war beginning to take shape. Gage had chosen his battleground, and it wasn't the boardroom, it was my family. The first shot came via a text from Marissa. Mom's crying. Dad's mad. Gage said you humiliated him at work. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at it, trying to figure out if I was more insulted by the lie or more exhausted by how fast he'd moved. By noon, the group chat had lit up like a Christmas tree. Mom, you know I love you, but can't you be more forgiving, Dad? Don't bring job stress into the house. And then the cousins started power doesn't last forever, Jazz. Remember where you came from. He'd flipped the narrative. Somehow the man who engineered my exclusion from Thanksgiving was now the victim of my so-called professional retaliation. I tapped out a single reply to the group. I haven't threatened anyone. I assess performance by data. I didn't exclude myself from Thanksgiving. That was someone else's call. Then I muted the thread. At the office, Gage had entered phase 2. He was everywhere. First one and last one out. His emails were over-detailed, excessively CC'd to higher-ups. It didn't take long before Caleb flagged it. He's trying to name-stamp every piece of work Caleb said during a check-in, tying his name to team output like it's his solo job. You see where this is going? I did. He was building a case for indispensability, planting receipts so if anyone questioned his role, he could cry sabotage. Or worse, discrimination. That same afternoon, the Redwood RX media team released our press statement about the merger. My quote as COO was front and center on supply chain integration, operational metrics, regional expansion. The article ran with a photo from last quarter's executive summit, and I knew it would hit Kansas before sundown. It did. 2 hours later, Marissa reposted the article on Facebook with one line, "Proud of my brother Jasper." Simple, sincere. But it detonated the second wave. Some of the comments were supportive, others weren't. Power looks good on you, but don't let it turn you cold. Wonder what it's like having your boss at the dinner table. Bet it's easy to fire someone when you sit that high. I didn't reply, but Marissa did. She defended me. Called out the double standard. Said I earned everything on that page. For the first time in months, she took my side out loud, and that silence from her corner of the house broke. But the shift didn't go unnoticed. I could see it in the way Gage stopped meeting my eyes in the hallway, even when he tried to overcompensate with polite nods. His grip on the family version of the story was slipping. Marissa had seen the truth, and the more she saw, the harder it'd be for him to spin it. That night, the company threw a casual post-deal celebration. Catered dinner, open bar string lights across the top-floor patio. Evelyn found me near the espresso station, swirling a glass of wine without drinking it. She called me Evelyn, said, eyes locked on mine. Marissa, wanted to know if you were vindictive. The word felt like a slap. I looked at her. I told her no, she added quickly. But she was scared. That came from somewhere. Gage. It always came back to Gage. The next morning, Caleb forwarded me an email from a legacy Redwood client, a distributor with a multi-million-dollar contract. The client was complaining that Gage had promised delivery timelines and discounts that didn't exist post-merger. Unrealistic, they called it. Unprofessional. And there it was. He wasn't just manipulating people. He was risking deals. I stared at the screen. We weren't in the realm of family dynamics anymore. This was breach of process. This was grounds for review. And I was the one who had to act on it. Tuesday, 8th. 47 a.m. I closed the door to the executive conference room and looked across the table at Jay and Caleb. Between them sat a printed packet of emails and call logs with one name threaded through every questionable line, Gage Hollister. Timeline, I asked. 2 weeks ago, Caleb said. He promised a delivery batch in 5 days. Post-merger logistics guarantee 12. I flipped the page. Discounts, shipment windows, terms all outside of the agreed policy. All signed off verbally by Gage to keep the client happy. This wasn't damage control. This was liability. We scheduled a formal check-in. Legal on call. Caleb in the room. Gage walked in looking equal parts defensive and smug. I know why I'm here, he said before anyone could speak. Let me guess, because I tried to keep a legacy client from walking, I didn't flinch. You committed terms that weren't authorized. He sighed. They were threatening to pull. You want to lose a top 3 account to play by the book. This book, I said, holding up the policy binder, keeps us compliant. Keeps us employed. He shifted in his chair, trying to recover the upper hand. You don't get it, he said. People are nervous. Everyone's scared about who gets cut post-merger. If I don't protect myself, I cut in. By making promises you can't keep. He blinked. Then tried the oldest trick in the book, redirect. You think this is about me? No. You just want me gone because I embarrassed you. Because of Thanksgiving. Admit it. And there it was. He said it in front of witnesses. Turned a performance review into a vendetta. I think this meeting's over, Jay said tightly. After he left, Jay looked at me. That's your conflict of interest in writing. It didn't matter that I hadn't raised Thanksgiving once. Gage had done it for me, setting the trap. If I moved against him now, I was the villain in a story he'd already begun telling. Marissa texted during lunch. Mom said you're trying to fire him. Is that true? I typed, deleted, retyped. Finally, no. He created a liability. I'm protecting the company. Then Dad called. Son, he said, weary and sharp. Don't do this. Don't make this a war. I didn't, I said. But I'm not walking off the battlefield because Gage's feelings are involved. That night I sat with Jay again. Let's do it by the book, I said. No shortcuts. We launched a full audit on Gage's deals from the past 60 days. Every client promise, every invoice, every email. If the behavior was a pattern, the report would show it. And any recommendation for action would come from Caleb's department, not mine. I stepped back from direct authority as Evelyn would expect. But I did make one call. Effective immediately, I told Gage the next morning, you're restricted from committing terms to external clients. All major deals must route through Caleb. He looked at me like I'd dropped a guillotine. I'm being silenced, he said. No, I said. You're being supervised. His mouth opened, then closed. He left without another word. That night my phone rang. Marissa. Gage wants to have a family meeting, she said quietly. Before Christmas. Says we all need to reset. He wants you there. I knew what this was. He says if you don't come, she continued. It proves you're not trying to heal things. He says it's time you apologized. Apologized. For the job I earned. For the professionalism I upheld. For being excluded. He was staging one final performance, a public reconciliation where I'd be pressured to kneel to absolve him in front of the family so he could win back what mattered most, the narrative. I looked at my calendar. Christmas Eve was 3 days away. This time I wouldn't walk into a trap alone. And I sure as hell wasn't kneeling. It started with a ping. Then 2. Then 6. By the time I made it to the office that morning, 48 hours before Christmas, Caleb had already forwarded the full audit packet from legal flagged urgent. The subject line said it all. Hollister. Pattern of unauthorized commitments. 60-day summary. I opened the file, fingers cold, despite the heat in my office. The document wasn't just an isolated blunder. It was a pattern. 3 separate client agreements promised terms well outside our post-merger policies. 2 included language Gage had later tried to clarify via email, rewriting his own words to look retroactively compliant. He wasn't careless. He was calculated. Slippery. This crosses the threshold, Caleb said in our video call 10 minutes later. Legally and ethically. I didn't respond at first, because he was right. And yet my chest didn't feel relieved. It felt trapped. The walls of this moment were too familiar, just like every family dinner when Gage pushed, provoked, prodded, and I was the one told to keep the peace. Only this wasn't dinner. This was Redwood RX. And if I acted now, they'd say I made it personal. If I didn't act, I'd be the COO who let loyalty override liability. There was no version where I got to be clean. Only honest. The second front opened by noon. Marissa called me, voice tight and nervous. Gage wants to have a family meeting, she said. Tomorrow night, at Mom and Dad's. For what I asked, though, I already knew. He says it's just to clear the air, get things back on track before Christmas, but... She hesitated. He said you need to come. Said it'll show whether you're really not trying to punish him. I closed my eyes. The trap was set. If I didn't go, I'd be the cold one. If I went, I'd be surrounded, guilted, forced into some hollow peacekeeping exercise staged like a reconciliation but engineered like a setup. Still, I answered quietly, I'll be there. I wouldn't run from this. But I wasn't walking in unarmed. That afternoon, I called Mina. Clear my calendar afternoon tomorrow, I said. Book me a same-day return flight to Kansas City, or a car, whatever gets me out before midnight. I called legal next. Every next step regarding Gage has to be by the book. No action during or immediately after tomorrow night. And if anyone from my family contacts the company, route them to compliance. Then I called Caleb. I'm stepping out of direct authority on this. You own the report. You present the findings. Copy that, he said. Finally, I sat alone and wrote a single sentence to anchor myself. Peace is not the same as justice. The next day, the calls started before I left for the airport. My mother. Just be open-hearted, Jasper. Let's not ruin the holiday. My father. We'll sit down, talk it through. Don't overthink it, son. Marissa again. Please just don't come in swinging. He's scared. No one asked how I felt. No one said you were wronged, only how not to escalate. How not to disturb the fragile balance that let Gage feel whole. I took a cab from Kansas City to Overland Park, arriving just before sunset. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was finally seeing how tightly the walls had closed in. Inside, Gage had taken center stage. Literally. He sat in the armchair at the head of the living room, arms draped casually, legs crossed, face poised with performative calm. Like he'd been waiting to start a TED Talk titled, How My Brother Ruined the Vibe. Marissa sat on the edge of the couch, hands in her lap. Mom hovered by the fireplace. Dad leaned against the wall, arms folded, unreadable. Glad you came, Gage said like a host greeting an overdue guest. I didn't sit. I nodded. Let's get to it. He launched in. He talked about pain, about being embarrassed at work, about how some things should stay in the family, about being a provider for Lila and Mason, how mortgages don't pay themselves, and how some of us don't have the luxury of job security that comes with a title. He made it sound noble, like this whole thing was about defending his family, not preserving his ego. Then he went for the real weapon, the kids. Do you know how hard it is explaining to Lila why her uncle doesn't come to her performances anymore? He said. Do you think Mason doesn't notice when the gifts stop? You think I don't have to choose between groceries and her braces? He looked at our parents, then at me. You're not just hurting me, Jazz. You're hurting your own blood. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt. Then I spoke. Calm, slow, surgical. One, I said I was uninvited from Thanksgiving before any of this happened. Let's not pretend I started the exclusion. He blinked. Just once. Marissa looked down. 2. At Redwood RX, I make decisions based on facts, not feelings. If there's an issue with your work, it'll be handled like any other employee, not because of what happened in this living room. He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. 3. All I've ever wanted in this family is a seat at the table that didn't come with conditions. I won't apologize for achieving things. I won't shrink so others feel tall. The silence that followed was brittle. Then Gage snapped. You always do this, he spat. Always make everyone feel like shit just by breathing. He stood pacing now. You think you're so perfect, COO golden boy, the one who made it. But you walk into a room and suddenly we're all supposed to feel small so you can feel big. That's not true, I said softly. Bullshit, he barked. You love being better. You need it. I didn't answer him. I turned to Marissa instead. Is that true? I asked. Do you feel like I have to fail for you to breathe? She stared at me, tears rising fast. No, she whispered. But I was afraid he did. That was it. The mask cracked. The performance unraveled. Gage stood frozen, caught between fury and shame. Then Dad, silent, until now, stepped forward. Son, he said to Gage, voice stern and tired, why do you think you have the right to decide who belongs in this house? For the first time in my life, Gage didn't have an answer. Mom said nothing. just sat down slowly on the edge of the armrest. The room had shifted. The script had burned. I was supposed to break tonight. Kneel. Apologize. Instead, Gage was the one being asked questions he couldn't control. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Caleb. I stepped into the kitchen to answer. Client filed formal complaint, he said, the one Gage overpromised. They want a contract revision before break, or they walk. I exhaled through my nose. Understood, I said. I ended the call still standing in my parents' kitchen watching through the archway as Gage sat back down hollow-eyed and shrinking. Tomorrow the process would begin. Official. Documented. In writing. And when it did, I knew what he'd say. You planned this. You waited for the moment. You used the company to punish me. But it wouldn't be true. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was just finally choosing not to protect the person who never protected me. Some stories don't end with applause. They end quietly with someone closing a door behind them, not in anger, not in pain, but in clarity. That's how it felt standing in my parents' kitchen that night. No victory lap, no dramatic confession. Just the subtle seismic shift of a story finally straightening itself out. For years, I was told not to ruin the mood. That being good at what I do made other people uncomfortable. That having standards made me uptight. That being left out was somehow my fault, because I didn't know how to just let it go. I was asked to compromise so many times that eventually silence started to feel like a survival tactic. But silence never saved me. What saved me was refusing to keep the peace at the cost of my self-respect. What saved me was staying in the room holding the line and saying without rage or apology that I wouldn't fold just to make someone else feel tall. Gage didn't fall apart because I exposed him. He unraveled because I stopped playing my assigned role. And if there's one thing I've learned through this story, through family politics, corporate traps, and the twisted narratives people build to survive, it's this: standing your ground will cost you comfort, but it will buy you back your name. You don't have to burn bridges, but you do have to stop pretending they never tried to collapse under your weight. I didn't ask for a war. I just stopped pretending the peace was real. And maybe that's where some of you are too. At the intersection of guilt and growth. Feeling torn between your love for your people and the unshakable truth that loving them doesn't mean enabling them. That forgiveness doesn't require silence. That kindness isn't the same thing as surrender. If you've ever been called too much for asking for the bare minimum, I see you. If you've ever been pushed out of a room because your presence reminded people of their own compromises, I see you. As this story comes to an end, what lingers isn't a sense of winning or losing. What stays is a quiet pause, a space where we can recognize ourselves. Sometimes the deepest pain doesn't come from strangers, but from the people we believed would always understand us. And the hardest part isn't facing them. It's keeping our hearts from turning bitter after being hurt so close to home. This story isn't here to decide who's right or wrong. It simply reminds us that many wounds in life grow out of very human fear. Fear of comparison, fear of being left behind, fear of feeling small inside our own family. When we see that the pain may still be there, but the blame softens. And sometimes that small softening is enough to let us breathe again. If this story touched you, if you recognized a piece of yourself in those silences, you're welcome to leave a few words in the comments, only if you want to. Here, we don't have to be strong or have all the answers. Being heard is enough. Thank you for staying until the end. If you'd like to keep walking with stories like this where we listen, reflect, and share with kindness, you can subscribe and be part of this community. Take care.